Ooh. Hello mountain bikers everywhere and welcome to another show from Old Man in Lycra. Yep, you are watching the weekly mountain bike show for the weekend warrior, where winning obviously isn't everything. On this channel you won't see any of this, or this, and none of this. But this week you'll find out how to service your headset armed only with one of these. Now, as you should know, this is called a multi-tool. And rather than just sit in your cycle shirt pocket for its whole life, it can be used very effectively to help you service your bike. Let's catch up with Andrew and take a look.
Okay, so what we're going to start with is a headset service. To do this, we're going to have to take the fork off. First step in that, brake caliper off. My trick so we don't lose these bolts here is just to put a little M6 nut on the end. Keeps everything together. It's particularly useful if you've got an adapter on the end and it's got all sorts of spaces on it. So 2.5, so we can take the hose clamp off. Next we want to just undo the stem pinch bolts. You don't need to take them out completely, you just need to loosen them. Then while you're holding the fork from the bottom, just take the top cap bolt out, and top cap, any spaces above the top cap. Stem off, and then spacer, top cap bearing, everything out there, and you drop the fork out. Right, so the lower headset bearing here will either come off on the top of the fork, or in this case it's stuck in the lower headset cup there. Right, so we've just pulled everything out here and laid it down in order so there's no confusion when you get it back together again. Top cap bolts, top cap, headset spacers, headset top cap, compression ring, and then your tube top and bottom bearings. Then what we've got to do is just clean everything off. This should be done around about every 50 hours of riding or so, or if you've been for a particularly wet or muddy or sandy kind of ride, because there's nothing quite like mud getting into your bearings to reduce their lifespan. Okay, that is the bottom bearing race. It's a very important little bit that sometimes ends up missing from your bike. And basically what that does is it presses into the bottom of this bearing and allows it to turn freely without it binding on the outside of the race there. The last bit of cleaning here is just to clean out the headset cups in the frame. Next thing to do is just to check your bearings. Just make sure there's no roughness or play or anything in them. That one and then this one. It's usually the lower one that goes first because it's more exposed to dirt and muck that comes off the front wheel. So now, before we put everything back together, we just want to add a thin layer of grease to all the mating surfaces. If you are on an aluminium frame or anything with aluminium inserts in the frame, you can use pretty much any grease you like. We use the Bellray waterproof grease because we find it gives quite a good life. If you're on a carbon frame, you'll want to use a carbon-friendly grease. There aren't that many greases that attack the modern carbon fiber, but to be safe, the Motorex 2000 is quite a good choice. Park Tool and Finish Line also make carbon-friendly greases. Right, so I've got a grease gun. You don't necessarily need one, but you know, what's the point of being a mechanic if you don't have the tools? So you'll see just a thin layer of grease around here. You just smooth that on. Drop the bearing on. Same again on the bearing because that's going to go into the frame. Then same on the top here. You just get a little bit of grease inside that cup there. Okay, the orientation of this bearing before you put it in is important. You've got to get the angular contact portion of it facing down. See on the inside here there's an angular contact bit that fits together with the compression ring. So we need to get that in that way around. Bit of grease on the compression ring as well. Basically anything that touches anything else that it's not attached to needs a very light coating of grease on it just to stop any creaks and squeaks. And drop that in. A little bit of grease on the top of that compression ring there, and top cap back on. And now we put the fork back in. So you've got the angular contact side going into the frame. It's just the other way around now because it's from the bottom. Slide the fork in. Just make sure you aim through the compression ring so you don't knock the top pieces out. And then your headset space is back on in order. stem back on, spacer. When you reassemble here, what you want is about 2 to 3 millimeters of space between the top of the steerer tube and the top of your spacer, because this top cap needs space to compress. This is how it keeps the bearing tight. As this top cap preloads the bearing by pushing down on that whole assembly over there and pulling the fork up through there. So you need a little bit of clearance over there so it's got room to move. If you don't have that, you're going to end up with a loose and rattly headset that you won't be able to tighten up. Top cap bolt back in, a little bit of OCD, making sure all the logos line up. That's just me. And then just tighten that up. For now, all we need to do is just make sure that that's tight enough to stop the fork from falling out. Right, so we want to get our hose clip back on. This is a fiddly little bolt and you want to be very careful not to cross thread it, because if you do, it will never work again. You don't want to make that too tight, just about one or two Newton meters. Right, and then we just want to get the front brake back on. Just get that start in there by hand. And these ones we don't want to make tight just yet, because we've still got to adjust the brake caliper. Right, and then front wheel back on. And we just set the front brake. We've covered this one in a previous show, a link for which will appear above my head shortly. Let's tighten 8 Newton meters, check that the wheel spins freely. Okay, the last step of the headset is just to adjust and tighten the stem again. So from this we're going to need it on the floor. Our first step here is just to grab a handful of front brake. So what we're looking for is any play in either the top or the bottom. You can even see that one moving. Adjust that play out with a stem top cap bolt. What helps here is if you just keep your hand on the front brake and you just keep wiggling it until that play goes away. There you go. Generally comes out about 2 or 3 Newton meters. And then add probably about 1/8 of a turn onto that just for preload. Swing backwards and forwards, make sure it's running smoothly. The dark art of handlebar alignment. And you can line up the stem with the tire, and then you can check that everything is straight just by using those 2 reference points there. And then the last step is just to tighten your stem binders up. Most stems have got a torque spec printed on them, usually between 5 and 9 Newton meters. 5 is about as common as it gets. If you don't have a torque wrench, it is about as much as you'd use to open a door, maybe a little bit less. You want to make sure that they're evenly tightened, because as you tighten the one, it loosens the other. And if you're unsure about your torque, a good sanity check is just to grip the front wheel between your knees. Make sure the bars don't twist when you wheel them around.
The next time we catch up with Andrew, he's going to use the same multi-tool to service your bottom bracket. This week, it's the Cape Epic, and probably as you're watching this video right now, the top riders in the world are busy killing each other for UCI points. Along for the 8-day ride are approximately another 1,300 riders, probably weekend warriors, who are busy ticking off one of the biggest items on their bucket list. Next week we'll catch up with a couple of them, as well as a short interview with 5-time champion Christoph Sauser. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you like this content and it's of value to you, share it with your mountain bike friends. And this Old Man in Lycra will see you next time.